Now let's see the types of salat. When we say types of salat in the Quran, this will help us to come to the conclusion and to understand why salat and what is salat, right? So now, chapter 24, verse 41. Let's see what God says concerning the birds. Do the birds also establish salat? Yes or no? Let's see what God says. Now, so God says, Alam tara anna Allah yusabbihu lahu man fis samawati wal ard. Then he says, Watayrun safat. Right? Then he says, Kullu kad alima salatahu wa tasbihahu. Wallahu alimun bima yaf'alun. Now God says, do you not see that God is the one to whom those in the heavens and the earth glorify? Somebody might say, they glorify God, but how can I know how they glorify? According to chapter 17, verse 44, you cannot know how they glorify. You can't understand. Right? You can see whatever they are doing to God. Like sometimes we hear the birds singing, we hear the lion, roaring, we can hear the cow saying meow, we can hear the cow say moo, we can hear, the sky making noise, we can hear the mountains making noise. Of course, they are all singing glories. But can I understand what they are saying? No. So God says, do you not see that God is the one to whom those in the heavens and the earth glorify? This glorification, according to chapter 17, verse 44, God says you do not comprehend or understand the glorification. You can't understand what they are saying. Then he says, as well as the birds in rows, the birds we see in different colors in rows, they also glorify God. Though God says, each, kullun, each, kad alima salatahu, each of them, not you, the birds, each of them knows its what? Salat. Each of them knows its salat. What tasbihahu, and then its what? Glorification. Each of them. He didn't say you know. Each of those birds knows its own salat. Do you see my point? Each of them, they know their salat. The reason why I gave this subject as types of salat, I'm going to show you there are different types of salat. Right? We have salat for the birds, we have salat for the hypocrites, we have salat for the disbelievers, and then we have salat for the believers. Yes. So now, so God says, as well as the birds, each knows its salat and its tasbih, that is glorification, and God is aware of what they do. So I'm not going to put the meaning of salat yet, but at the end of the program, you understand what salat means. Good. So by this, according to chapter 16, verse 78, God is the one who brought you out of the bellies of your mothers, knowing nothing. So when we all came out from our mothers, we don't know anything. We are empty-headed as babies. So now we have to come and learn from our parents and other people. Then God said, He's telling me and you, chapter 96, verse 5, Allama al-insana ma'lam ya'lam. He is the one who teaches the human being what he knows not. So God is the one who teaches the human being what he knows not. So sometimes as a parent, you'll be surprised, how did my child know how to do this or how to do that? You'll be surprised. Nobody taught the kid, but they know already on their own. You understand? So it is God doing that. Then apart from that, chapter 17, verse 36, God is telling us we should not pursue that of which we have no knowledge. So if you don't have knowledge on something, don't pursue it. Wait till you have knowledge, then you do it. But the knowledge must come from God if it has to do with the religion of God. Similarly, if I'm going to school, my academics, and the school I belong to, everything I have to study concerning what I'm going to write in the exams has to come from that school. You see how it works? Good. So now, chapter 2, verse 282. In that verse, God says, Wattakullah wa yu'allimukumullah. So God says, reference God. That is, be pious to Him. Fear Him. Then He can what? Teach you. Because you are a part of the religion of God. In the line Islam, chapter 3, verse 19. The religion belongs to God. So since you are in the religion of God and you are a Muslim, He has given you a book which is a clarification for all things. Tibyana likulli shay'in, chapter 16, verse 89. So since God has given you a book which is a clarification for all things, now you have to humble yourself, have the fear of God, so God can teach you. So that's why He says, Wattakullah wa yuhallimukullah. Then He can now teach you. So good. So if God has to teach us to know what the salat is and what we have to do, I need to humble myself, have the fear of God, and listen to God. Now, according to chapter 8, verse 34 to verse 35. Now, the disbelievers, this is the way they do their salat. Listen carefully. It says kafirun, that is kafirs. Listen to the way they do their salat. God says, but why should God not punish them while they are repelling from the sacred mosque, that is Masjid al-Haram, and they were not its guardians, that is the custodians. Its guardians are only those who are pious, but most of them do not know. That is the Masjid al-Haram, where you invoke God, you call on God, the place of obeisance and prostration. Now, verse 35, and their salats, وَمَا كَانَ صَلَاتُهُمْ إِنْدَ الْبَيْتِ. Where is the Bayt? The Masjid al-Haram. The disbelievers, their salat at the Bayt was what? إِلَّا مُكَاءً وَتَزْدِيَةً. وَتَزْدِيَةً. That is the disbelievers. Do you understand? That is the disbelievers. So God says their salat at the house, al-Bayti, which is the Masjid al-Haram, was only singing and clapping. Then God says, so test the punishment for what you have been disbelieving. Which means they created their own salat different from what God told us as salat. Do you see? So here, God says, you fazukul azaba. Fazukul azaba bima kuntum takfurun. Do you see? Aha. So in this context, the disbelievers, they have their own way of doing their salat, which God does not accept. Apart from that, we are going to see the salat of the hypocrites. When you go to chapter 4, verse 142, this is what God says concerning the hypocrite, which means the hypocrite, they also establish salat. Yes, they establish their salat. But let's see how it works. God says, Inna al-munafiqina yukhadi'una Allah wa huwa khadi'uhum. Then he says, wa iza qamu ila salat qamu kusala yura'una an-nas wa la yazkuruna Allah illa qalila. So God says, indeed, the hypocrites are deceiving God while God is deceiving them. Here, this part, somebody can say, hey, so somebody is deceiving God and God is deceiving, so God is a deceiver. No. The rules are clear. This is what God says. According to chapter 42, verse 40, according to God, when somebody does you something bad, he has given you the chance to retaliate. It is part of God's law. That is kisas. When somebody does something to you, God wants you to reply it on equal terms. It is part of God's law. So when the hypocrites are deceiving God and God is deceiving them back, it doesn't mean God is a deceiver. No. God is just retaliating what they have been doing to him. Do you see the point? So similarly, according to chapter 16, verse 126, if somebody uses something to attack you, God says use the same thing to attack them back. So it is part of God's law. It is not a contradiction or to say God is evil. No, that is not the point. Now, when we go back to the context of the verse, God says, indeed, the hypocrites are deceiving God while God is deceiving them. And when they get up for the salat, or when they get up, they stand up, or they get up lazily, kusala, that is lazily, to show the people. Now this is similar here. This verse I just read. Who are those who do the salat to show the people? You forgot? فَوَيْلٍ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ أَصَّلَاتِهِمْ سَاءٌ الَّذِينَ يُرَاءُونَ. They only do the salat so that people can see them doing. That's all. They are not doing it for God. Do you see? Chapter 107, verse 4 to verse 6. Right? Do you remember those groups? What God is giving them warning. Those are the hypocrites. So similarly, it is repeating here. They stand lazily to show the people. And they do not commemorate God. They do not call God to remembrance except a little. That is the hypocrite. Because a hypocrite is neither here or there. He can say he's here, but he's there. Do you see how it works? Good. Now, so we've seen the salat of the what? Hypocrites. Right? Now we are going to see the salat of the believers. I take you to chapter 19, verse 58 to 59. Chapter 19, then I go to verse 58 to verse 59. Let's see the salat of the believers. Right? Surah Maryam. So God is going to tell us something. God says, أولئك الذين أنعم الله من النبيين من ذرية آدم ومما حملنا مع نوح ومن ذرية إبراهيم وإسرائيل ومن هدينا واجتبينا إذا تتلى عليهم آيات الرحمن خروا سجدا وبكيا. Then it goes, verse 59. فخلف من بعدهم خلفوا أضاعوا الصلاة واتبعوا شهوات. Then he says what? فسوف يلقون غيا. What does the verses mean? God is talking about a group of prophets. Then he says, those are the ones whom God had favored among the prophets. Among the prophets. You check the list, you see Musa, Ismail, Ibrahim, Idris, you understand, Jesus, it keeps going. He mentioned in Surah Maryam. Then now he's telling us about a group. Then he says, from the prophet, from the descendants of Adam, because out of the descendants of Adam we started getting prophets. Adam is not a prophet, or Adam was not a prophet. No, there's no single verse in the Quran where it says Adam was a prophet. I throw the challenge to anybody listening. And of those we transported with Noah, and of the descendants of Abraham and Israel, and of those we guided and chose. They all do what I'm going to read now. When the verses of the gracious Rahman were recited to them, they fell down in prostration, or they fell down to show submission, or they fell down in what? Obeisance and weeping, crying to God. So whoever has a problem with the falling down in obeisance or to show submission or prostration, check my lecture concerning the sujood. There is an actual sense of sujood, prostration in the Quran. Yes. I don't care how you do it. Whether you put your head down, whether you don't put your head down, whether you want to do it, so far as you're falling down on the ground, it is called prostration. Now, then verse 59 is going to give us the hint about the salat. Do you see the point? For people who are saying salat means following closely, let's check here. Is it following closely? Does it have a physical act of prostration? Yes. Does it have the physical act of reciting the verses? Yes. But I will give you the spare part of the salat later. Thank you very much, Abdul Salam. So let's see. Chapter 19 verse 59 is going to tell us the context of what the prophets were doing. What is the name of what they are doing? The act you see in chapter 19 verse 58. We want to understand what is that thing they were doing. What is the name of that thing? Reciting the verses and falling down in prostration, and you understand what is the act? How do we call it? Then God says, but the successors, فَخَلَفَ مِنْ بَعْدِهِمْ, after this prophet he mentioned, the Badihim is talking about a group of people he mentioned earlier. So they said, but the successors who came after those prophets he mentioned, lost Ada'us Salata. They lost the Salat. Do you see the Salat has Adatul Tarif? As Salata. It's just like me telling you, oh, you lost the book, which means you know the book I'm talking about. Do you get the point? So the people who came after this prophet, they lost Ada'us Salata. They lost the Salat. This is the real original concept of Salat. There. It's not about following closely. Following what closely? Overlapping God. Is that what you mean? Al-Musalli, to overlap God like this? God is Sabikun and you are Allah, planning God. And follow desires. Come and follow what God is explaining to you. You are following your own opinion, saying Salat means commitment. Salat doesn't mean I have to stand and recite the verses. It doesn't mean I have to prostrate. It means following closely. Okay, keep on following closely. So they follow their desires. Therefore, they will encounter what? Error or temptation. Just like God says, La ikraha fid din, qad tabayyana rushdu min al-gayy. That word is here, gayyan. Same thing. To encounter error, temptation, straying. Good. So now we can see the salat of the believers here. We compare it to the salat of the disbelievers, it's not the same. We compare it to the salat of the hypocrite, it's not the same. You see the difference? But we can call all of them salats. Hypocrites do salat, disbelievers do salat, believers do salat. But are they the same? No. So this one, God mentioned the salats. The believers, the one they do is called as-salata. That is the correct salat. So this is the same salat God asked Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam to establish for the believers according to chapter 4 verse 102. So let's check the evidence. Surah An-Nisa chapter 4 verse 102. Thank you very much, Salam. Now chapter 4 verse 102, we go and see how God told Prophet Muhammad to establish the salat. God says, فَإِذَا كُنْتَ فِيهِمْ. Listen carefully. This is God speaking. وَإِذَا كُنْتَ فِيهِمْ. This kunta is talking to Muhammad. You. Second person singular. Yeah, you. When you are among them, that is when he is with them at that time. فَأَقَمْتَ لَهُمُ الصَّلَاةَ. Then establish the salats for them. That is, the salat has a datul tarif. It has a definite article. It's just like if I tell you, if you go home, take the book for them or read the book for them. You already know what I'm talking about. The book. I don't need to pinpoint to show you which book again. You know. So now establish the salat. Which salat did we see? We saw the prophets, chapter 19, verse 58 to 59. God asked Prophet Muhammad to establish the salat for them. Then he says, فَلْتَكُمْ تَائِفَةٌ مِّنْهُمْ مَاكَ. The word takum comes, stand. فَلْتَكُمْ. Then let a faction among them stand with you. So salat has to do with standing. When they stand, فَلْيَخُذُوا أَسْلِحَتَهُمْ. And then they should take their weapons. Somebody will say, why should they take their weapons? Because at that time, Prophet Muhammad was gaining dominance in Mecca. So he has to be cautious of the what? Mushrikun. Go and check chapter 9. Find time and read chapter 9 till the end. And you see the struggles Prophet Muhammad did with the believers against the mushriks. So they have to be aware at that time. Then he says, فَإِذَا سَجَدُوا. You see here. So after they stand, they are going to recite the verses. Then after that, God says, فَإِذَا سَجَدُوا. Then he says what? فَلْيَكُونُوا مِنْ وَرَائِكُمْ. After they are prostrated, they can go and be behind. Then God says what? فَلْتَأْتِي تَائِفَةٌ أُخْرَى. Another group should come. Then he says what? لَمْ يُصَلُّوا. This salat, you see the verb. Yusallu, that is sallu is a verb of at salat. So the ones who have not done the salat, lam yusallu, fal yusallu ma'aka. Then they will now come and do the salat with you, the Prophet. Do you see? So God says, and when you are among them, then establish the salat for them, and let a faction of them stand with you. It's an act of standing. Then you recite the verses. We already saw what happened to the Prophet in chapter 19, verse 58. Then he says, and let them take their weapons to carry with them. And when they have prostrated, done the sujood, then let them be behind you. Now they will go behind and stand, and let the other faction who have not done the salat come, and then let them do the salat with you. Now we have seen the salat of the believers. We saw that what the past prophets did, and we saw what Prophet Muhammad also did for the group. The same thing. There's no difference. If you have time, write chapter 19, verse 58 to 59, write it down, and then find time, write chapter 4, verse 102, sit down, contemplate, and compare if you see any difference. Good.